Hello everyone and welcome back to the 3T Path channel. Welcome back to our Uddhava-gita course. Now we are in a wonderful special session of the Uddhava-gita course where we have the Swan Avatar, the Hamsa Avatar, described by Krishna himself. So it's amazing. We have an avatar being described, which we have, happens lots of times in the Bhagavad Purana, but this one is being described by Krishna himself. And it's a very special, unique avatar, the Hamsa Avatar, the Swan Avatar, who appeared only in front of 5 people, the 4 Kumaras and Lord Brahma, the very top of the beings of this universe. And it's just deep spiritual philosophy, really mind-blowing stuff. So here we are, we're in the 11th canto, 13th chapter, verse 23. And of course, if you want to watch all the previous classes, we have over 60 classes already in this Uddhava-gita course. All you have to do is join the channel here, become a member of the channel. The instructions are here in the description of the video. Or you can go to Uddhava-gita.com where you can have the whole course organized and you can see how to join and watch the whole course. Okay, so verse 23. So, Lord Hamsa, Lord Swan is speaking to the 4 Kumaras. And it's really funny because the 4 Kumaras asked, "Who are you?" And so he just took that question, who are you? And he used that already to start teaching them spiritual philosophy. So we did one verse last class and we're doing this one now. If by asking me, "Who are you?" you are referring to the material body, then I must point out that all material bodies are constituted of 5 elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Thus, you should have asked, "Who are you 5?" If you consider that all material bodies are ultimately one, being constituted essentially of the same elements, then your question is still meaningless, since there would be no deep purpose in distinguishing one body from another. Thus, it appears that in asking my identity, you are merely speaking words without any real meaning or purpose. It's really funny. He's just giving them a really hard time just because they said, "Who are you?" He's giving them a really hard time with all this philosophy, and they're like very intelligent, philosophical beings. So they're like, oh no, yes, we shouldn't have asked that silly question from him. So at the same time, he's giving us all this teaching about the spiritual and the difference between the spiritual body and the true self, the material self and the spiritual, and the material body and the spiritual self. He's giving us all this knowledge about these things and saying that, if it's just matter, well, matter is composed of the 5 elements. So what are the 5? But all bodies are just made of prakriti, of matter anyway, so what's the difference between one body and another? It's just, there is no difference. It's a meaningless question on the bodily platform. So anyway, purport. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur explains this verse as follows. In the previous verses, Lord Krishna demonstrated that if the sages accepted the impersonal philosophy that all living beings are ultimately one in all respects, their question, "Who are you?" was meaningless, since there would be no philosophical basis to distinguish one manifestation of spirit soul from another. So in the previous class, in the previous verse, Lord Hamsa said, hey, if you think, as the Advaitins think, that there is no difference between one soul and another, there's no distinguishing, it's all just Brahman, there's no such thing as a difference, then the question of who are you makes no sense because there's just one. So that wouldn't be a good question. Now, then in this verse, no, if you think you're talking about the body, then it didn't make sense either. If the sages accepted the body as the self, then their question was also meaningless, since they would have to ask, "Who are you 5?" If the sages replied that although the body is composed basically of 5 elements, and these elements can be considered a single substance in the form of a whole body, then the Lord has already replied by the words Samaneshu Chavastuta. The bodies of human beings, demigods, animals, etc. are all composed of the same 5 elements and are essentially the same. Therefore, the question, who are you, is ultimately meaningless. Thus, if one accepts either the theory that all living entities are ultimately the same, or the theory that all living entities are ultimately non-different from their material bodies, in both cases, the question of the sages is meaningless. The sages might argue that even among learned persons, it is common practice to ask questions and give answers on many subjects as a part of normal life. The sages could point out that Lord Krishna also distinguished among them by his saying, Vipra, O Brahmanas, and Va, or your question, as expressed in this verse. In this way, it is seen that the Lord also accepts the ordinary customs of questions and answers. To answer this argument, Lord Krishna states, Vacharambo I anartaka. The Lord states, my addressing you as Brahmanas is merely an exhibition of words if we are ultimately not different. I merely reciprocated with your approach to me. Therefore, if we are ultimately one, neither my statement nor your question has any real meaning. I can conclude, therefore, by your question to me that you're all not actually very intelligent. Therefore, why are you inquiring after ultimate knowledge? Aren't you all embarrassed? Srila Madhvacharya points out in this regard that the questions of the sages was not appropriate since they had already seen their father, Lord Brahma, worshipping the lotus feet of Lord Hamsa. Since their spiritual master and father was worshipping Lord Hamsa, they should have immediately understood the Lord's position, and their question is thus meaningless. So, they had the situation. It was Lord Brahma, the very topmost being of the universe, and their father and their spiritual master. And then this being appears out of nowhere. Lord Hamsa just shows up there because they had this doubt, because Lord Brahma wanted the Lord to answer the question that he could not answer. So this being appears. So obviously they should have figured out. And then Lord Brahma is offering obeisances to this being. So it's like, obviously, if Lord Brahma is offering obeisance to him, there is nobody higher than him in the universe, so there must be someone outside of this universe. In other words, it has to be God. So obviously it was God. So it was actually a meaningless, silly question to say, who are you? Because obviously that is God. Who else would it be? He just showed up there. There's nobody else. Why would Lord Brahma be offering obeisance to him? This is the beginning of the universe. There are not that many beings in the universe anyway. So it was a meaningless question, but it was used to expound this wonderful philosophical statements about, there's 3 positions you can take. Or, the Advaitic position of Shankara. We're all the same. There is no difference. There's no differentiation. Any difference is just Maya, the Mayavadis. It's just no difference whatsoever. So if there's no difference, why would you bother saying, who are you? If there's no difference. So if you're an Advaitin, the question doesn't make sense. If you're a materialist and you identify with the body, the question doesn't make sense either, because bodies are ultimately just made of matter anyway. It's all the same thing. So it was used also to express the fault in these 2 philosophies. And of course, the third option, which is the option that the Bhagavata explains, is that no, we're actually different. I'm an eternal soul, you're, and that's what Krishna says in Bhagavad-gita so clearly as well. You an eternal individual soul, I'm an eternal individual soul, and God is the supreme soul, Paramatma, beyond all other souls. So that's the correct understanding. Verse 24. Within this world, whatever is... Now he's going to start going deeper and getting to the question that they had, which invoked his presence, that Lord Brahma couldn't answer. Within this world, whatever is perceived by the mind, speech, eyes, or other senses is me alone and nothing besides me. All of you, please understand this by a straightforward analysis of the facts. So within this world, this is a classic spiritual statement. Appears many times in Bhagavad Purana. Within this world, whatever is perceived by the mind, speech, eyes, or other senses is me alone and nothing besides me. All of you, please understand this by straightforward analysis of the facts. So this statement is there that everything is God, in a sense that everything is God's energy. Yoga Maya, His Maya, Guna Maya, everything you see is an energy of the Lord. There is nothing outside of the Lord. The philosophical view of God in the Vedas is different from the Abrahamic view of God, of a supreme being, which could then even have the competition of a devil. There is no such concept in the Vedas. In the Vedas, everything comes, it's a Sankhya philosophy, everything is derived from God. From God, everything else is there. So everything is God in that sense. Not that God ceases to be God Himself, not that He ceases to exist also fully and completely, but everything that does also exist is an emanation from Him. He is the source of energy. So the example given is of the fire. You have fire, and from the fire you get sparks and you get smoke. So they say the sparks are the souls. Many sparks, right? Big fire, many sparks, limited number of sparks. So that's us, the little souls. And then the smoke, the dense thing, which is kind of useless and is a bit of a pain, that's material energy. Now, the smoke is coming from the fire, but it does not reduce in any way the splendor of the fire. And the sparks, they are minute little versions of the fire. So they are like the fire, but different. They have their own existence, but they're made of the same stuff, fire. So that's how they give this classic explanation of the fire, the sparks, and the smoke. But everything is God. Everything is coming from the fire. The sparks is part of the fire. The smoke is part of the fire. Everything is the fire. So that is the view in the Vedas. Purport. Lord Krishna has already explained that if the sages consider all living entities to be the same, or if they consider the living entity to be the same as his body, then their question, "Who are you?" is inappropriate. Now the Lord refutes the conception that He is a supreme God far beyond and different from everything within this world. Modern agnostic philosophers preach that God created the world and then retired or went away. According to them, God has no tangible connection to this world, nor does He interfere in human affairs. Ultimately, they claim God is so great that He cannot be known. This is the position of many religions. Islam has this position. You can't know anything about God, can't say anything about Him, shape, form, exist. No, you can't say anything. It cannot be known. Therefore, no one should waste time trying to understand God. They don't say that, but some people say that. To refute such foolish ideas, the Lord here explains that since everything is the expansion of His potency, His energy expanded, He is not different from anything. Nothing can exist separately from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And thus everything shares in the Lord's nature, although some manifestations are superior and others inferior. So the whole idea that in what you're doing in your spiritual life with spiritual knowledge, with this jnana, what that's going to give you is the vision that everything is connected to God. The very definition of illusion, Maya, is to think that something is not connected to God. That is the very definition of illusion. And that is just the Lord's illusory power. Makes you think that something isn't connected to God, though it is. That is also the Lord's energy, His illusory energy. So everything is connected. Higher and lower. Higher means us souls, consciousness, conscious entities. Lower means matter, dull matter, no consciousness. That's the difference. That's the higher and lower mentioned here. Smoke and sparks. The Lord is testing the intelligence of the sages by pointing out various contradictions in their questions. Even if the Lord is supreme, He is not different from His creation. Therefore, what is the meaning of the question, "Who are you?" We can clearly see that the Lord is paving the way for a deep discussion of spiritual knowledge. Verse 25. My dear sons, the mind. Now, finally, he's going to get to their question. My dear sons, the mind. I should read the question for you. I'll read the question for you so you can remember what their question is that invoked the presence of the Lord. We spoke about it in the last question. So, this is the question the four Kumaras, led by Sanaka, brought to Lord Brahma. They couldn't figure it out, so they brought it to Lord Brahma, who was their father, topmost being of the universe, and their spiritual master. So they said, "O Lord, people's minds are naturally attracted to material sense objects. And similarly, the sense objects in the form of desire enter within the mind. Therefore, how can a person who desires liberation, who desires to cross over activities of sense gratification, destroy this mutual relationship between the sense objects and the mind? Please explain this to us." So this was their question that Lord Brahma couldn't figure out. He couldn't come up with a good answer because he's so involved in the creation of the universe. The gunas affected his intelligence and he couldn't figure it out. So that's why he asked for God to come and answer the question. So then they asked, "Who are you?" We went through all that. Now, beginning of the answer of the question, verse 24. Within this world, we did that, verse 25. Okay. My dear sons, the mind has a natural proclivity to enter into the material sense objects. And similarly, the sense objects enter into the mind. But both this material mind and the sense objects are merely designations that cover the spirit soul, who is part and parcel of me. So now he's driving a wedge between the whole issue of the mind and the senses and the real you. So this is viveka. You have to distinguish viveka, distinguish matter from spirit. This is the essence of yoga. Yoga Sutras, the whole point is viveka of Purusha and Prakriti. The word is Purusha. In the more Vedanta tradition we're doing here, it's Atma. So we want to viveka, we want to separate, we want to drive a wedge between Atma, the you, the spiritual person you are, and matter, Prakriti. We want to understand this difference, and that's what Lord Hamsa is doing here. So he says, look, yes, of course, the mind goes into the sense objects, and the sense objects are there in the mind because they're both matter. This is a very somewhat difficult thing to understand, but you have to get to it at some point in your spiritual journey. Understand that you're not your body. That's okay. That's kind of easy, not too hard to understand. Your body's changing anyway. You might lose parts of your body and you're still you. So it's not too hard to understand that you're not your body, right? But then you have to understand that you're not your mind either. You have to understand that the mind is also an element of the material world. It's a very interesting concept, brilliant concept of the Sankhya tradition and in the Bhagavad Sankhya and all Sankhya, this concept that the mind is actually an element of matter. It's part of matter, just as liquids and solids and gases and radiant energy and vacuum are all aspects of matter. So is mind, and so is buddhi, intelligence, and so is ahankar, the I maker, the false ego is translated. This identifying, the thing that makes you identify with matter. These are all elements of matter. They're all elements of matter. So when the mind is there attached to the sense objects, it's not too strange because they're both matter. They're both things of material nature. So that's going to happen. But both this material mind and the sense objects are merely designations or things there which cover the spirit soul. Atma. The Atma here, the word is. So then you have to, and these are all part of me, Mad Atma. Krishna says, part of me. Because we are higher. We're the sparks, not the smoke. So these things, the mind, the material mind, and the sense objects, they're all part of the smoke. But we are sparks. And sparks are part of the fire, God. So God, fire, we are the sparks. And all the mind and the sense objects, that's the smoke. So we have to use viveka, we have to drive this wedge between these two. Purport. Lord Krishna, in the form of Hamsa Avatar, on the pretext of finding contradictions in the simple inquiry of the sons of Brahma, who said, "Who are you?" is actually preparing to teach the sages perfect spiritual knowledge, but only after first rejecting two false concepts of life, namely, that all living entities are the same in all respects, which is the Advaitic philosophy of non-difference, and two, and that the living entity is identical with his outward or subtle body. So these two things you have to understand are going to lead you to confusion. First, again, the concept that it's all the same thing, there is no difference, there's just the one, this Brahman, which is the Shankara's Advaita philosophy. That's the thing, that's going to get you confused. And the other thing, which is wrong, is the materialistic point of view of identifying the self with matter. That's also not going to work. So we want to discard these two ideas. Lord Krishna now answers the difficult question that puzzled even Lord Brahma, the question that the sages asked him. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the sons of Lord Brahma were thinking as follows. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, as I've explained many times, he's this wonderful spiritual master in our lineage from the 1600s. And he's famous for, in his beautiful commentary of the Bhagavad Purana, he did a commentary on it. He elaborates these like extra, visions and words and narrations of what's going on. It's like he enriches, he takes that, the teachings, and then he enriches, like, oh, they were thinking this, and and then he adds all these things that they were thinking, of course it's his view, it's his explanation, but the way he explains it is very nice. By saying, oh, they were thinking like this, and this was happening, and he enriches the story with extra descriptions of what people were saying or thinking. It's very interesting. So he says, this is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So they were thinking, he said, this is, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's idea, that the four Kumaras were thinking, or dear Lord, if it is indeed true that we are unintelligent, of course it is not, but he's just adding this extra narration. If it is indeed true that we are unintelligent, still your lordship has stated that you are actually everything, because everything is the expansion of your potency. Therefore, you're also the mind and the sense objects, which are the subject matter of our question. The material sense objects always enter into the functions of the mind, and similarly, the mind always enters into the material sense objects. That's their question. Thus, it is proper that we inquire from your lordship about the process by which the sense objects will no longer enter the mind, and the mind will no longer enter the sense objects. Please be merciful and give us the answer. So it's sweet, isn't it? He just gives this extra dialogue, okay, so we're not very intelligent, but, and then he just makes this beautiful extra dialogue, and it's really nice, enriches, and gives you, more understanding of what's going on. It was wonderful work. The Lord answers as follows, and again, this is, this is him adding this extra dialogue. My dear sons, it is a fact that the mind enters into the material sense objects and the sense objects into the mind. Thus, although the living entity is actually part and parcel of me, part, because made of the same stuff, parcel, because it's an individual, eternal thing. That's why it is part and parcel. Of me, like a spark is like a separate thing, but it's part of the fire, but it's a parcel. It's separate from the fire. So it's the same but different. Beda abeda tattva. Thus the Lord, although the living entity is actually part and parcel of me, being as I am also eternally conscious, and although the eternal form of the living entity is spiritual, in conditioned life, the living entity artificially imposes upon himself the mind and the sense objects, which act as covering designations of the eternal soul. So, though you are an eternal spiritual Atma, when you come into matter, then the material mind, and intelligence, and false ego, and the sense object, all these things cover that soul. This is us. That's what's going on right now. We are this eternal spark covered by smoke, covered by the smoke of material life. So all the mind, all this material stuff is covering our eternal self. Since it is the natural function of the material mind and sense objects to mutually interact, how can you possibly endeavor to prevent such a mutual attraction? Since both the material mind and sense objects are useless, they both should be given up completely. And thus, automatically, you'll be free from all material duality. So now, again, this is all this extra dialogue. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur he's super cool. So he just gave this whole extra dialogue between the Kumaras and the Lord Swan and Lord Hamsa Avatar. So he gave this extra dialogue to explain, to go deeper in explaining what's being said here. So the point is, according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, his explanation is he's saying, look, since you have this connection between the mind and the sense objects, and you're different from the mind and the sense. So just get rid of the mind and the sense objects completely. Not just the sense, get rid of the whole thing, the mind and the sense objects. That's what so get rid of both, not just one. Don't just try to get the sense objects away from the mind. Get rid of the mind and the sense objects. Understand that you are apart from both the mind and the sense objects. Okay, Srila Sridhar Swami. Now this is an earlier guru in our lineage. This goes back about 800 years. Srila Sridhar Swami points out that the symptom of the material mind is the tendency to consider oneself to be the ultimate doer and enjoyer. Very important point. Very important point. The ultimate doer and enjoyer. That's the condition of the materially eluded soul. He thinks that I'm doing, I own things, I'm the doer. So we've had videos about this in this channel where we talk more about this point. Very important to understand this. Naturally, one with such a puffed up mentality is helplessly attracted by the sense objects. One who considers himself to be the doer and enjoyer will be irresistibly attracted to the means for attaining sense gratification and false prestige, namely exploitation of material objects. That's the whole thing that souls are doing in the material world. That's what everyone is doing. That's the whole point of material existence, right? Exploitation of material objects, always trying to get sense gratification and false prestige. That's the big program we're all in this material world. Now, above the material mind, however, is intelligence, buddhi, which can perceive the existence of the eternal spiritual soul. Now we're invoking buddhi. The first yoga Krishna presents in Bhagavad-gita is buddhi yoga. It's the first thing he did, chapter 2. He says buddhi yoga, connect you to your soul to God, connect yoga, buddhi, intelligence, use knowledge. And that's why, Bhagavad-gita, look at this, Swan Avatar, Uddhava-gita in general. It's all about knowledge. Give me knowledge. If you get this jnana, this knowledge, then buddhi becomes powerful. Krishna tells Arjuna in Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna, use your spiritual intelligence to break free from krodha, esha, kama, esha, to break free from your entanglement with the gunas, which makes you have anger and desires. Break free from that with intelligence, buddhi. So this is very important. So buddhi is there, and you can use your intelligence to figure out how to have more sense gratification, false prestige. That's how material intelligence is used. But that same intelligence can be used now for spiritual enlightenment. And with that intelligence, you can then now perceive that there's something beyond the mind. You can perceive your true self. So, therefore, by intelligence, one must realize one's eternal form as spirit soul, part and parcel of the Lord. Again, that term, part and parcel, of the Lord. And completely reject the bogus material mentality. One who revives his original spiritual mentality becomes automatically detached from material attraction. Therefore, one should cultivate knowledge of the falsity of sense gratification. When the mind or senses are attracted to material enjoyment, the superior intelligence must immediately detect such illusion. In this way, one should purify one's mentality. By devotional service to the Lord, bhakti, such detachment and intelligence automatically awaken, and by full understanding of one's original spiritual form, one is properly situated in eternal consciousness. Wow. I hope you like that. Powerful, deep stuff. There's more coming. And this stuff is just, it's deep. It just blows your mind, doesn't it? If you get into it, it really will blow your mind. And it will get you out of this material entanglement. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have. And have a rest of your day with lots of peace and lots of love. Hare Krishna.